What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. Today's guest is Shane Hazel, but before I do a proper introduction, I want to hit you with a word from our sponsors, Ground News. Today's sponsor is Ground News. Now, if there's one thing that we can all agree on, it's that the media landscape is fundamentally broken. Both social media and the press are incentivized to exaggerate our differences and amplify division. A lot of people ask me where they should go for news that they can trust, and I don't usually have a good answer for that. However, Ground News has taken a totally different approach in improving the broken media ecosystem. They're a news comparison platform, giving you the ability to compare how sources with different political biases are covering a certain story, so you can easily see if it's being spun to fit a political narrative. You can click on any article and see how balanced the coverage is. The blind spot feature allows you to see stories that are exclusively being covered by either the left or the right. This allows you to identify news that you may otherwise miss in your own bubble. Ground News is an apolitical platform. It's a place for moderates, conservatives, liberals, and the politically homeless. Try it for yourself today by downloading the free Ground News app on the App Store or Google Play Store. Just go on the store and search for Ground News. Highly recommend it. And we are back. Welcome to another episode of Real Talk with Zuby. Today's guest is the wonderful Shane Hazel, my bad. He is a lot of things. He is a staunch libertarian advocate. He is running for governor in Georgia next year. He is a family man, a father, a husband, combat veteran. This man does a lot of stuff. Welcome to the show, Shane. How you doing, man?
Brother, I am super tickled to be on your show, man. And it's somebody said, "Hey, Shane Hazel, he's got an opening," and I was like, "I'm in."
Awesome. Yeah. This is coming at late notice. I had a late postponement because someone, my previous guest, got stuck, I think, on a flight. I think his flight got delayed or something, so wasn't able to make it home in time. So Shane has stepped up to the plate. I was planning on having him on the podcast later this year anyway, so we've brought it in advance. So how you doing, man? So I've done a brief intro. So introduce yourself to the people who don't know you.
Yeah, ladies and gents, my name's Shane Hazel. Really good to be here with you guys. And like Zuby said, I'm part of the Mises Caucus in the Libertarian Party, kind of the bomb throwers, flamethrowers, all that fun stuff. Combat vet, served with First Force Reconnaissance Company in the early part of the Iraqi War, 2003 and to 2006 there. Did a couple deployments there. I've run for U.S. Congress, U.S. Senate here in Georgia. And yeah, man, I'm a family man and a homesteader and a homeschooler and you name it. Like, I am trying to divorce myself from this murder cult that we call the government banking corporate cabal over here. So it's obviously trying to spread some freedom on my own podcast called Radical. So it's a full-time gig for sure.
That's awesome, man. So I'm curious to know how you got to this position with where you are now. So tell me a little bit about your background and your life story. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'll tell you what, I grew up as a neocon, and a lot of guys out there may have heard the story, but yeah, I grew up in a very suburban Georgia area in the 80s. And so a very isolated bubble, not a ton of culture out of like 700 people. We had maybe like 10 minorities in the entire graduating class. Went out to West Georgia University, and around 2001, I was about to start my fourth year of school and university out there, and 9/11 happened. And like a idiot, I ran off to decide, I was going to go out and get some revenge and serve my country. And boy, I'll tell you, I had my eyes opened on my second tour. I was in the Battle of Fallujah in November, and I was reading a guy named John Taylor Gatto, Weapons of Mass Instruction, and he was talking about the state and where the indoctrination programs came from out of Prussia and were brought into the United States, so that they had all these good little workers and good little soldiers, so that when the state got into a mix, they'd run off and fight wars for them. And it wasn't anything about freedom. It wasn't about liberty. It wasn't about, anything really even American. It was just about the government banking corporate cabal over there, running over very poor people and being involved in places where we weren't. And I kind of had that moment, and I was like, holy, they got me, the system got me. So I had a revelation, and went back to the books and tried to throw off all the indoctrination that I had. And at, the point where I started becoming a constitutionalist, I kind of had some autism in terms of like learning, backwards and forwards, the governing documents, where they came from the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. And when I found the Anti-Federalists and guys like Lysander Spooner afterwards, it really just kind of opened my eyes to the idea that this aristocratic combination of, very powerful people has always been around. And when I saw that they would take and centralize authority and power and policy and everything else between not only the government but the corporations and the banks, they had this this mechanism down. They use economics, they use fear, they use military, they use anything and everything at their disposal to control people to live off, basically, and prevent entry into market. And so once I started really getting through that, being a libertarian was kind of about the only fit for me. The Republicans absolutely rejected everything that I was talking about in 2018, and came down here in 2020 and ran for Senate. And it was just, it was so nice to be, I don't know, just kind of loved by people in your own party and promoted and pushed, and to have people be consistent in their principle and their ideas, and really pushing the principles of peace and liberty and consent in everything that we do. And so that's kind of the cliff notes of a very, I guess, long 20 plus years here in the last I guess right at 20 years. So yeah, that's kind of how I've come to be this bomb thrower in the libertarian movement.
That's powerful, man. What was it like having that? So you had that realization while you were literally out there on a combat tour?
Yeah, and that's the thing is that my second tour, we were doing so much direct action, and then we got called up for the major battles of Najaf and Fallujah, and we were almost there a year. And, I had about, I don't know, 2.5, 3 months left when I read that book. And yeah, it was one of those things that just kind of, rips your heart out. You think, and Americans are notorious for, being, star spangled, glittery, awesome, right? Like we think we are amazing. We're told all these, tales in school, and when it comes down to it and you see what we do overseas especially, and then you start to understand that we're not only doing that overseas, man, we're doing that here in America, to marginalize people that don't have the money and the resources to defend themselves. It broke my heart, because I wanted to believe that we were a different type of nation. We're not. We got a different type of people, I think most people are still pretty good, and they're patient, obviously, after this last year. But yeah, to try to go on with combat operations after having that awakening, boy, different change of mind for sure.
Yeah, that's so interesting to me. When you initially went out there, if you can put yourself back in that mindset and that mentality, what was your feeling when you went out there? What did you feel like you were fighting for?
Well, when you first get to a place that, and like I said, I grew up in suburbia. So to be flown over to the Middle East the first time and then to take a ship over the second time, you're involved in so much culture that you've never had before. And then I got to help out with Operational Detachment Alpha. I think it was a 5th group, Special Operations Forces guys, because we were about to transition into being MARSOC from First Force Reconnaissance Company, and contributing to SOCOM per Donald Rumsfeld back at the time. He said, hey, Marines, you're going to start contributing to special operations as SOCOM. And so we went down to a little operation base in Najaf, and I started to, have people who were indigenous people all around me all the time. They cooked for us. They provided security for us. They cleaned. And we trained tons and tons of these guys. And, you start to see people in Islam are not bad people. It's just different. It's just not what you are. Are there radicals in every part of the world? Sure, there are. I mean, not like the good radicals, like the bad radicals, like, you know what I mean? So it's like, you start to see that, hey man, yeah, I get it. I understand that there are some bad seeds out there, but at the same time, you start to see the humanity in a lot of people in a lot of different ways, which you were told was damn near impossible from, the intelligence that you have. So, initial thoughts were, yeah, man, we're going to go in here and we've got the military might. This will be quick and easy, and we'll be out in, like they did with Desert Storm, Desert Shield, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we're still there. So it changed as we started, doing direct action. We were taking out some guys that were making bombs. We were taking out some guys who were lieutenants, but it was all over the place too, because we started to also see that we went in there to try to help the Shiite population and the Kurd population against the Sunni population in the Ba'athist. And what ended up happening is one of the first big battles that I was really in 2004 of August was Najaf. And that was against, the Grand Ayatollah Sistani and Muqtada al-Sadr, who was Shiite. He obviously he hangs out in Iran and the Shiite circles a lot these days. And I was like, what are we doing with the Mahdi militia, who's a bunch of Shiites? Shouldn't we be using, these guys to help perpetuate like what the mission is supposed to be in the first place? And so it just all comes unraveling. If you're a thinking, individual, and you can go out and see, what you're being told in intelligence meetings and everything else it's led up to that, you start to really see through the facade that is the military industrial complex and what you're doing there. And then the questions start arising. You're walking around like, what the hell are we doing?
I hear that. When you say the military industrial complex, for someone who doesn't really understand what that means, can you explain it to them?
Yeah, so we often refer to it as the MIC, and the military industrial complex is this unholy alliance between the government and the different huge giant corporations out there, that'll spend $35 billion on a jet fighter, or basically it's a propagation and subsidizing of industry that wouldn't normally exist, right? Like we shouldn't be at war, and so the warfare industry should probably be next to nothing, right? Like very small. If you got some companies that have, some people with some really deep pockets that just want to make, weapons of war, yeah, okay. But the problem is when it's subsidized by the American people, and then these guys are the first people in line to get that dollar fresh off the printing press or the Fed here in the United States. It's like, well, if they're first in line to get the trillions and trillions of dollars and then spread it out and then obviously use it in destruction. I mean, if you're a fan of Hayek or Hazlitt or any of the Austrian type economics, you understand like the opportunity loss. You understand all of these different aspects of pushing resources into destruction instead of creation. And it's absolutely heartbreaking to see like that this industry over the past 20 years has grown leaps and bounds. And I mean, we spent $6 trillion overseas, spending $750 billion a year through NDAAs and continuing resolutions to help support the troops. And just like, God, that's not what we're doing. We're handing out welfare to giant corporations, basically.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of zeros over there.
It sure is.
So I know your podcast is called Radical, and you are a true libertarian. Where I live over here in the UK, even the concept of libertarianism doesn't really mean a lot to most people. It's a much more common and better known philosophy in the USA than it is here in the UK or even in Europe in general. So, and I have people who are going to be listening to this all over the world. So for someone who doesn't really understand libertarianism, when you say you're a libertarian, what does that mean?
One of the core tenets is the non-aggression principle. It's good ideas don't require force, and we don't hurt people, and we don't take their stuff. If you want to boil it down, but we have to be consistent in those principles in terms of being a libertarian. And I'll tell you, a lot of people don't understand it even here in the United States, where I think they'd be more libertarians out there, right? We are blackballed and propagandized against by the powers that be to begin with. So basically in all aspects of life, whether it's economics, whether it's government, whether it's your religious life, whatever it is, it's your choice. If you want to be a part of a commune or a socialist society, cool, man. Don't force anybody else into it. If you want to be part of a minarchist society, great. If you want to be part of a republic, great. I don't care. If you want to be an anarchist, better. It's that the end of the day, peace and liberty and consent in all things, in all transactions among us. That's what libertarianism is about. And so, people will, kind of jump on us about, well, what about this aspect of that government provides and this aspect? And it's like, well, we think the private sector can do that better, where we're cutting out middlemen, especially with the technology that we have today in terms of reviews and ratings and boards that don't exist in government, where there's bureaucracy, there's corruption, there's theft. And I think, most people agree in this day and age that, we're dealing with thieves and murderers at every level of government, right? It's just like, well, why would you ever give those people power and money to make decisions about your health or your roads or whatever the case? It's like, there are people out there that actually want to earn that. There's, the supply side, demand side, but, it basically comes down to being, economically Austrian versus economically Keynesian, which leads to situations like the economic meltdown that we're in, which is
you might need to explain those. You might need to explain those terms.
Austrian versus Keynesian.
I get it, but for everyone else.
Yeah. So Austrian economics comes from a place of savings and value, right? Whereas Keynesian economics is a debt-based economy system. A debt-based economy system is what we have in basically around the world, because the dollar is, quote unquote, the reserve currency of the world. Mm-hmm. So when you live in a debt-based economy, what it does is a lot of things. Obviously, it destroys the wealth that you make in one day to the next day through inflation and things like that. But it also destroys, civilization through people chasing after a dollar that's going to be, more and more worthless over time. It destroys culture. You look at what we've seen today. It's not, just one culture that's kind of been hijacked by the dollar. Like, a lot of cultures have sold out to the dollar out there. And at the end of the day, you're left with bubbles. You're left with, all these different mechanisms that, people in the Fed, people in the government, people in corporate America, or wherever else will try to manipulate for their own doing. Whereas Austrian economics works off of savings. There's this idea that you trade, life in this world for a skill set, or for work, or for whatever. And when you, as a free being, trade your life for something, it's yours and it belongs to you. And so there's a trade-off. And so if you have an excess of something and you can invest it into, let's say, very basics, like if you're a farmer and you go from a hoe and you need a plow, you're going to have to take some time and effort and skill and apply those things and trade some off, maybe in terms of your working the garden or the farm, and put that into a new skill set. Now, that skill set is one of those things where you can teach somebody and they can pay you. You can share it through transaction and sales, but it's basically where we talk about savings being wealth versus debt, a debt economy being, the absolute worst in terms of an economic system. Mm.
Why is libertarianism not more popular? Why are people so resistant to these basic ideas of freedom, liberty, and voluntarism, and choice, and lack of coercion, and the non-aggression principle? You'd think that, I feel like on a level, most people agree with that, wherever they are on the political spectrum. I think it's quite an obvious human desire, but people have this understanding of the government or what they think its role should be. And I don't know if it's just decades and decades of that being the norm, but why do you think it is that people are so resistant to some of these ideas?
I think in this day and age, I think it all stems from what we'll call compulsory government indoctrination systems, right? Okay. Or camps. School is what everybody else calls it. I don't use their language, Zuby. Man, I can't do it.
I hear that. Okay.
It's a lie, man.
What did you just call them? I like that.
Compulsory government indoctrination camps, right?
Wow.
Like
Okay.
You have to go at 5 years old, and right then and there, your right of association is destroyed. Like, you got to ask to do natural things like go to the bathroom, and you can't sit next to your buddies, and you can't, like, there's all these things that, like, the school just comes in and says, sit down, shut up, open to this. And then there's some really good reads like John Taylor Gatto's, What I Teach in 6 Lessons, and it will blow your mind. I actually just did a podcast about it recently, but it's one of those things where I think because they get you at 5. And then at 18, you're either left to go off into the workforce or go off into more indoctrination or go off into the military, which is even more indoctrination. And at the same time, you're probably starting to pay attention to politics a little bit and the entire, industry in terms of, entertainment is propagandized. The quote unquote news is propaganda for the murder cabal. And you're just like, you don't have a chance unless you can sit there and say, man, they got me, like I was duped. No, most people don't want to have that realization. They don't want to have that moment, what they say in the South, that come to Jesus moment, right? Like they don't want to have that moment where they're like, man, I was duped. I was wrong. I see it now. Right. And so when people can't have that moment of introspection and pause, a lot of times what happens is they recoil. And when they recoil and they double down, and you see the cognitive dissonance and the anger and for presenting people with, just an idea. Mm-hmm. It is very telling. You can see it happen all the time. I think, all of these things kind of add together, are why the idea of peace and liberty and consent, or libertarianism, has really not taken off. But I think we're about into a moment right now, especially here in the U.S., where we start to see, this scale, right? This continuum where people always talk about the left and the right in America and Democrats and Republicans. It's not really accurate. What's accurate is tyranny and freedom. And so on that far side, you've got Republicans, you got Democrats, progressives, conservatives, whatever they want to call themselves, that are part of the duopoly system. And then on the other scale, on the other side of that scale of freedom and tyranny, on the freedom side, you have the libertarians. And those people are the ones that are actually like, hey, man, we're not really down with systems. We're not really down with leaders. We're not really down with your cult. Like, we're not down with any of this stuff, man. So it's like, hey, you do you. As long as you don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, we're real simple people.
Yeah, I hear that totally. I mean, I'm pretty libertarian. Not pretty, I'm very libertarian maybe myself. Yeah. I think one of the weaknesses, though, of libertarianism is it's based around voluntarism, right? So put in front of something that is willing to use power and use authority and use tyranny, it's like fighting with both hands tied behind your back, right? Because if you're running for the Libertarian Party, say, as I know you've done and you are, the Republicans and the Democrats, say, in the USA, they've got the firepower very, very both metaphorically and literally, right? In terms of numbers, in terms of willingness to, pass certain moral boundaries, or to use coercion, or to use shady money, whatever it is, by hook or by crook. Mm-hmm. They've kind of got this power advantage. And I do also think that lots of people, like, moving away from the parties, but when it comes to voters even, a lot of people want to be taken care of, or at least feel like they are, and they want to outsource. They kind of want to outsource stuff. People kind of say they want to be free, but as you've really seen, especially if you've been paying attention over the past 15 months, you'll see that a good chunk of our population is not that keen on freedom and liberty and even basic human rights and human choices, even as an adult. So I think a lot of it is that psychological craving almost for authority. Like, people do really want that. I think a lot of people feel scared or unsafe or fearful, whatever it is, when they do not have big daddy government at least pretending that he cares about them.
Well, it's that reflex, right? It's like from the moment they sat down in that class, they were like, "Oh, I gotta ask, right? Like, is this okay, right? Like, like that's a hangover." And I'll tell you, when you look at the operations of a state against people, a lot of times what I got to see was the psychological operations, all the pre-warfare that goes into kinetic warfare, and that fear. Man, you nailed it. Like, that fear is what they find, and they find what people are afraid of, and they lean on it, and then they find the divides that causes, and they lean on those fissures, and they just divide as much as they can, and it's all fear all the time. And at that point, the people who buy into the fear are the ones that are easily manipulated and controlled and used against those of us that are like, hey, you know what? Like, I'm going to take my chances, guys. I understand the risk. I get it. But guess what? I'm not buying into your fix. Like, I got it. And that's the thing is like libertarians, man, like what you said, why is it hard for libertarians are guys that live on the side of a mountain behind two gates in the middle of nowhere, right? Like, I don't want to do politics. I don't want to be anywhere near this kind of stuff. But hey, man, like I see you guys getting closer and closer to where I live, and I want to be that warrior in the garden, but you guys are not giving me a lot of choice, man. I don't want to revert. I don't want to see that stuff again. I definitely don't want to see it among, my fellow brethren here. It's like, let's not do this.
Yeah. I mean, it was crazy to me. I mean, was it yesterday or the day before when Joe Biden, benevolent Joe Biden, and the CDC were making announcements that Americans who are fully vaccinated may now go outside without a mask on. I heard that. I was like, wait, hang on a second. Like, there are so many things wrong with what you just said there. Firstly, if you've been going outside every time with a mask on, look, it's your choice. Like, we're libertarians. Right. You have the right to do that. But I'm not so sure that you're following science. But then the fact that, I mean, I was like, who was waiting for permission for that? Were there people literally sitting in front of their TV with popcorn, waiting for the CDC to tell them that they can, if they're vaccinated,
you see what Biden said? We can go outside. You can take off one of the two masks. You can stand 3 feet together. Like, what? They're clowning you guys, man. They're like, they go off backstage and they just go, hey, man, I told them to wear 2 masks. Look, I said you can go outside. Hey, instead of 6 feet, we can do 3 feet. Like, it's a clown show, people. Like, they're making fun of you and they're having fun at your miserable expense. It's nuts.
It's wild, man. It's wild. So I'm curious, in your own personal position, especially as someone who's run in the Libertarian Party, which is, of course, by definition, a political party, what do you think the role and scope of government should be?
Boy, completely voluntary. I think, most government would go away. I saw some study, and I don't know if it was Denmark or where it was. It was up in one of the Scandinavian countries. And when they made, a number of programs voluntary to pay into or to direct democracy almost, right? It was like, well, most people were like, I don't find any value in that, so I'm not going to fund those kind of things. So, I'm more of an anarchist, and I'll be very upfront with everybody. I'm an anarchist, but it doesn't mean like I think if you want to have small groups of whatever your collective mindset is that's free to enter or leave, I think that's okay. I just don't think that you should ever be able to be forced into a contract or a way of life or a belief system or any of those kind of things. And so, one of the things that I'm looking at in terms of my platform is, getting rid of all nonviolent crime to begin with, right? It's like, hey, you know what? Murder, rape, assault, kidnapping, vandalism, coercion, theft, and maybe fraud. Like, those are the things I think maybe there is a small local type of state, out there like a sheriff, and maybe a couple deputies that can take care of those kind of people. Because let's face it, most of the time it's local. It's somebody who's committing a violent crime or theft or vandalism or whatever the real crime is. And I think that's where a message of libertarian actually really sells too. It's that, hey, listen, we don't agree on anything anymore, America, like or the rest of the world, right? We don't agree on the color of the sky anymore. And it's like, can we at least agree that these things are bad, right? And I think, just through obvious interactions on a daily basis, the 350 million people here in the United States, we're not killing each other every day. We're not robbing each other. Like, there are some bad people who do these things to people, but I don't think, humankind is inherently bad. I think most people just want to live their life and be left alone. And so where I've found great progress with this type of, message and idea towards, government is that I can have people who are former, neocons like myself, and I can take the most progressive of the progressives and we can agree to those ideas and those definitions of crimes. It's like, okay, cool, guys, let's start over. Let's start there. Like, we can at least agree on that. And, if in your municipality or whatever it is in your little area, if there's something that's nuanced, then do something about it, and do it of, free volition and free thought and free exchange of ideas where you're not forcing people one way or another. Because at the end of the day, like if you're pointing guns at people to enact your morality, your ideas, or your policy, your ideas suck. That's just the bottom line.
Interesting. So I'm curious about, so you said you're an anarchist. Number one, I think again, you'll probably need to define that, because anarchist is a very scary word to people. So first of all, when you say that, what do you mean by it?
Yeah. So the definition of anarchy is just no rulers, right? So it at least enjoys the neutral ground. It could be good, it could be bad, but it just means not having a ruler. It's not chaos. And I think a lot of people get the idea of chaos and anarchy mixed up very often because of propaganda. Chaos is where you have a system where the people who are the quote unquote leaders of the system don't actually follow that system. There's no repercussions, there's no accountability, there's no responsibility. And I'll kind of contend that when you look around the world in this time and age, it's like, well, we have lots of different types of systems. What we don't have is stability. We have complete chaos because of the departure from, constitutional contracts, which failed miserably, and that the anti-federalists told us we were going to fail. So I think that's really, it's not as scary as if you're an independent type of person, right? If you can provide for your own security, I make no reservations about saying that the world is not a safe place. It never has been. It never will be a safe place. There are people who want to do bad things to other people and will take advantage of situations. So, your own defense, your own security is something that you have to take responsibility for. And when governments, prevent people from doing that, I think it is absolutely heinous, because it violates what I consider, kind of the first right as a human being, and that's self-preservation. But yeah, it's not that it's total chaos, and it's not that governments can't exist. It's that whatever situations you find yourself in, you shouldn't ever be forced into them. You should it should be a consentful relationship. It's like, it's consent is what makes sex and not rape, and it's what makes the exchange of goods, not robbery. So it's just those things.
I get that. I've always understood anarchism sort of theoretically in the same way that I understand socialism and communism theoretically. But do you think that it's something that's truly viable like that? I mean, I can understand wanting to go from where we are now closer towards it.
Right.
But with all of these philosophies, to be honest, as an absolute, I don't think any of them make sense, right? I know with the communism one that's been tried. With the anarchism as well, whilst there are some aspects of it as a libertarian, some aspects of it, I'm like, okay, I'm with you on that. But in practice, so if you take, the USA, 330 million people, how would that work and actually look in practice? And it seems to me like it would end up with chaos.
So what I think that people miss is a lot of people promise you, utopias, and that's not what libertarians promise you, especially the anarchy side of libertarianism. We're not promising utopia. What we're telling you is we provide for the truth about human beings, and then we provide through consent against those things. So I think, in terms of let's just for the sake of arguments, like you talk about like the smallest denominal unit, decentralization of all sorts, right? Because whenever you remove power from your local area and give it to somebody who's not accountable 500, 400,000, 3,000 miles away, let's face it, they're least likely to be accountable to you in those positions. So in these small areas, if we can, if we have people who are marauders who do take advantage of people, what we can do is fund a sheriff or a police force that, through voluntarism, right? So I think most people would happily give some money to a sheriff to combat, very bad people in their local areas. I don't think for a second that you can really expand that and grow that outside of that. In terms of roads, roads here in the United States weren't a state function until about the 1900s. So it's like we did this before, we can do it after.
To be fair, though, people also didn't have cars like they do now at that time, right?
Well, I mean, it's like anything else, right? We have more technology in the private sector, and in terms of cars, roads, mapping, the ability to put new roads in. It's all about consent. What I see as chaos a lot of times is swept under the rug because of the monopoly of force that the government has. A lot of times they condemn people's property and they said, hey, we're taking your property and we're not going to give you fair market value, right? Like, I think that's chaos. I think when the government says, hey, listen, you no longer have the right to speak, right? Because, we've got this new platform and it's got so much tech in it, and your voice can be heard all the way around the world. Like, we're going to deperson you. Well, that's a problem. I think that's chaos. I think anytime you're a system has a monopoly on force and can destroy what somebody's put their life into as a peaceful person, I think that's chaos in itself. And so it's just in our system, what I think is superior is we're not pointing guns at people to support our ideas or our morality. And we're also saying in our system, if you want to be in a commune, go do it. Show us how to do it. If you want to be in a republic, cool, go do it.
Gotcha.
If you want to be an anarchist, fine. It's just we don't believe that pointing guns at peaceful people is the way to do it.
Yeah, I get it. Like I said, philosophically, I totally get it. I do just think practically, again, knowing human nature, knowing human nature, it's like, okay, even if it starts like that,
it's tougher.
And how long does it take for, a powerful entity or entities to end up becoming something like the government we already have, possibly worse even.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, one big question, actually, what about things like national level security? What about what's the anarchist position even on immigration or national defense? What are the positions on that?
So there's nuance here. In current situations, and this is, I think, gets glossed over all the time. Like, the libertarians are open borders people. Well, we're property rights people. In the perfect system, it's property rights. Are you invited onto a piece of property, right? If you're not, then you're trespassing, and there's obviously a problem. Now, with borders in a system that doles out money from taxpayers to somebody who's receiving it that, quote unquote, didn't earn that, right? Libertarians obviously understand you can't have a system that exists where the taxpayers are being fleeced to pay out to other people, right? Like, it doesn't work that way. So we're very much open border, private property people. We talk about imaginary lines on maps and stuff like that, right? Like, it's true. Basically, if the state exists and it's taking money from people, it's not fair to the people that they're paying into the system to be, handed out to people who are coming in and benefiting from those handouts. But in terms of, the utopia, right? Like, it's private property. It's private property rights all the way.
Okay, I get that, but I still don't really understand how that. I'm not sure I totally understand how that applies to country lines. So, okay, you've got that gigantic border between Mexico, gigantic border with Canada. If someone is in Mexico and they just want to come over to the USA, just roll over. Can, like, millions and millions of people just
do every day?
How does it work? Yeah,
right.
Like, how does that work?
Well, that's the thing is, in our world, we're not handing out. We're not first and foremost, we think taxation is theft. So we're not taking money from people by force to begin with to subsidize other people's lives or businesses. And let's face it, a lot of people get mad at immigrants here in America because they're like, oh, they're coming over here and taking our jobs. Well, you know what, man, that's probably not true. And on top of that, the subsidies that are going to the military industrial complex and every other, complex that's supported through subsidies, the corporate welfare in America is more draining. But to digress into we don't see it as a problem. You cut that off, you cut off the taxation, you cut off the all the subsidies, and at that point, you really don't have an immigration problem.
Okay. Has this ever been tried anywhere?
Oh, that is a great question. Yeah, and here's
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it kind of, in the world, it's always been conquest, right? I mean, you look at what happened here in the United States when we weren't the United States, we were kind of British colonies, right? I think, at some point, if we would have, quote unquote, we, the Americans, would have respected property rights, we wouldn't have done what we had done inside of America, right? It wasn't our land. It wasn't, it wasn't anything like that. And so, when you look at, what what may have happened, let's just say if there was a confederation of tribes that said, no, you know what, like these are lines you guys don't get to cross. And had they had the means to, protect these lands, I think they definitely would have. But, they didn't have the power to stop it. And I think it actually kind of makes the case that, listen, in a world with no lines, private property is what people should be respecting.
Again, yeah, it's so interesting because I agree with it philosophically, but then I'm also just like, yeah, well, if someone wants to take your stuff, as you've just said, if they've got the firepower, then
right,
there's I think we agree on. I think everyone agrees on what is. Not on everything, but generally here we agree on what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah.
You would kind of like
you would agree that you would agree now that the biggest guns are the government and they'll just come in and take your stuff anyway for the corporations or for whoever they want.
Yeah. But at the same time, those big guns do also protect the USA, for example, from foreign threats. So just as the way the UK was created, is in the way that we know it. And lots of the world, right? I mean, I'm from the UK, right? Great Britain used to own like a third of the world or something like that. I have no idea. Looking at people now, I have no idea how that happened. But at one point, but at one point that happened, and that was technology and firepower. Really, it wasn't about morality. It wasn't like, oh, look, these peaceful Africans are just chilling here. Oh, these people in India is like, yeah, they're chilling here, but we've got guns and we want stuff and we want resources. So it always comes back to that sort of human deficiency of greed and aggression and violence and just wanting more, just wanting to take stuff.
Maybe I could propose this, like we kind of throw around the idea that we have like 500 million guns in America, right? That they know about. Let's face it. There's about 500 million they don't know about. I would really, to see what America has not been able to do in Afghanistan against the Pashtun culture, right? To see that farmers in dirt huts have repelled not only the Americans, but the Soviets, before that, the Ottoman Empire. Like these guys they haven't changed their way of life in centuries, and yet they are able to repel more and more advanced armies, divisions, legions. Like it happens. And so when I look at America, and we've got 500 that we know about, right? 500 million guns. Like, do we really need a national defense? Maybe there's an incursion somewhere. Maybe there's a landing. But you want to talk about an actual galvanizing event here in the States. Go ahead and set foot on American soil and start killing Americans, right? Like, oh man, that sounds like a bad idea. Because that's the thing is you'll have guns hanging out of every window in every skyscraper. You'll have guns hanging out of every home. You'll have guns hanging out of every car and truck. Like and not to mention the amount of veterans that we've created over the last 20 years on top of understanding that, hey, a lot of us are, special ops guys. Like we understand asymmetrical warfare and psyops, and we understand like you can take a bulldozer and up armor it in a matter of about 25 minutes with the right, torch, right? It's like, nobody wants to fight that. Like I don't anyway. And
I get, I don't know, like I get it, but I'm also just like, man, you got like, people have like fighter jets and bombers and tanks, and like if
they still lose.
So okay, I don't know. I'm like, okay, if I'm kind of running a scenario in my head. Okay, say Russia or China stayed the way they are with the military that they have, and the USA disbanded its military, but they still had those 500 million guns. It's like, my money's not on the USA.
Really?
This situation, no. Without the actual military, no chance. Like, why go
Wow,
get
man.
destroyed?
So there's a, I mean, I guess if you want to kind of look, I mean,
Nukes. I didn't even mention nukes. Like, I
yeah,
didn't even
yeah.
mention that. Yeah.
I mean, the thing is nukes aren't going to go away just because, we're not a United States. If we break up, which probably, hopefully in a very peaceful way where we kind of do like a DC exit, we're like, hey, guys, we're kind of cool. You guys aren't, screw those guys in DC. If we do kind of a DC exit here and it's, Georgia and Tennessee and in a region or whatever the case is, it's like, well, I think, you probably still have some nukes. I think you probably still have tons of weapons. I still have, helicopters and all those kinds of stuff. And there's probably a lot of Philadelphia that goes on. And hey, man, listen, look what they're doing out there. That's kind of cool. Maybe we'll adopt, some of this kind of stuff, and maybe we won't do that. And maybe we'll privately pay into this kind of stuff as well, right? Like for a defense, putting money into more defensive measures as the DoD was supposed to, instead of like the offensive measures. Like we don't need to be conquests, going out and taking over the world anymore.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, man. It's interesting. Like I'm really intrigued by, like anarchism is one of those things that I'm intrigued by. Honestly, I don't. I like the philosophy. I don't honestly think it's tenable.
Tough.
Yeah, I think a shift towards libertarianism is definitely the right direction. I think you want to be shifting downwards towards libertarianism rather than upwards towards authoritarianism.
Right.
But like I said, I think the remote end of any of this quadrant doesn't work for me in practice. I just don't think it works in practice. I think
it's hard to see it, isn't it?
Yeah. Just like, I've chatted to people who think, I don't know how anyone still thinks communism is a good idea, given that it has been tried in multiple countries, different places. And it's like, okay, I can understand how theoretically in someone's brain this sort of works out, but then you see the reality of it. And again, it comes back to human nature. Greed, aggression, selfishness, violence, right? So you'll have these communists where, they're saying, yes, we're doing this for the people, for the workers, whatever. And then the rulers I was in Romania a few months ago, and, you've got the second biggest building in the world there after the Pentagon in Bucharest, Romania, right? So heavy that it sinks a couple centimeters every year. What's called the presidential palace built by Nicolae Ceausescu. And it is over 1,000 rooms. The chandelier, some of the ceilings are made of gold. It's just he destroyed a third of the city and displaced over 20,000 people just to make this building. And it just sits there and you're just like, this is insane. And this is only going back to this is in our lifetime. I mean, right. I just look at that and I did a tour of the building and it's so ostentatious. And then you're reading about how the people were living at that time with their ration cards. And I think they were allowed something like 20 liters of petrol or gas per month. And they had to, line up for, and this is in the 80s. This isn't even ancient history. And you're just learning all this stuff and you're just like, this is crazy. If you learn about everything, Mao in China, Stalin in Russia, all of these different people, you're just like, man.
To your point, that's the thing is like in the 1900s alone, like government collectivism slaughtered 270 million of its own people. Now, I'll sit here and throw the flag in America. Like, look what we've done to the Middle East. The millions of people that have been killed, even more have been displaced, and it's just there. It's all over Africa. Like, this is the problem with collectivism. Like, we're supposed to be this free. We're not free here in America. We've never been free in America. What they did was they spread out the slavery in the 1800s, right? It was different. But you're not free here in America, and they're going to take all this money and then they're going to go do terrible things to people around the planet. So it's like I know it's a very tough concept, and it's scary. I mean, it's scary to say, yeah, you know what? We don't need all this protection, right? Like, it's the world. I've traveled all over the world too. I mean, to the scariest place I ever went was probably, I think, where you're from, Saudi Arabia, right? Like, I didn't I felt like a total outsider, was followed from one block to another. But like the rest of the world where I have been, from the southeastern parts of Asia to Australia to, all over Europe. And it's just like, man, everybody's kind of the same. Like, they're just kind of cool people. They just want to, share with you their local heritage and culture with you. They want to, smile. I mean, it's not, what I've seen is like, man, if this world could understand anything, it's like, hey, guys, we're all on the same team. People versus government, right? And it's like the governments are the one that screw it up. If the governments, if Joe Biden wants to go fight somebody, well, go fight the prime minister over there. I'll buy you the ticket. I'll get you, like, let's have that death match, and let's let all the young people live. Everybody else, like, just. But that's the thing, is it's like the state's the state that's collective. They're going to continue to murder and thieve and kill. Whereas at least in the ideal utopia, boy, at least you don't have the state doing it, man. The state has such a massive scale advantage over everybody else.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So moving on from that, I know you are making a run for governor in your state of Georgia. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we got locked down in March of last year, late March, man, and I was just like, ooh, man, this governor down here and we don't speak the same language anymore, right? And it's like, yeah, he came out on television. He said basically, you can't assemble in more than 10 people anymore, and if you see people doing this, tell them to disperse, and if they don't disperse, call us. And I was like, this isn't America. What the hell is he talking about, man? So right then and there, I kind of got this burr. And as soon as my Senate run was over, and I cost, quote unquote, from the Republicans, I cost them the Senate and control and all. I was the guy, man. And so I got so much hate mail. I was like, oh, you guys think you've seen something? I'm running for governor next. And it's like, oh man, like just parlayed it right into, the next run, but it's got to be done. This is my most local run. It's definitely going to be one of those runs where it is completely different. Like my Senate campaign, I didn't even raise money. I had my show. I said, listen, keep your money, give it to your neighbors, give it to charity, give it to the people in small businesses who are being shut down by the state here. Like, do that. I can go out there and I can see people. I can reach people from my podcast. I can do all of these things that I don't need to take money from, the corporate interests to go out there and run this campaign. And so for me, it's going to be all about getting rid of all the nonviolent crime, releasing all the people who are in prison or jail for nonviolent crime. It's going to be opening up, the farming industry here, which is our biggest industry. And right now we don't have access in Georgia to cannabis or psilocybin or any of those natural types of medicines out there. So we're gonna open that up. You want to do what you want to do with your land, by all means. And what we're also going to do is start looking at things like Bitcoin and moving away from this fiat currency that's going to go extinct here probably within, I don't know, the next few years anyway. But we're going to try to get the jump on that, and just really do things completely differently than the system, and start shutting down a lot of the government to begin with. So, like you said, won't be totally libertarian, but we'll definitely be moving toward that side of liberty for sure.
Moving in that direction, yeah.
Yeah.
And a term you've used quite a lot of times is nonviolent crime. So I think when people hear that, probably the obvious thing that comes to people's mind are drug-related offenses. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Are there not any crimes that are nonviolent that should still be considered crimes?
So nonviolent, like trespassing is a crime, right? Like if you're not welcome on somebody's property and you're there, most likely, you're unwelcome to begin with, and it's going to be different for everybody. It's going to be, hey man, like either take a hike or you're welcome to be here, right? Like depends on the person whose property you're on. But yeah, I think trespassing is one of those crimes like that is definitely something that's quite non-violent, but still, hey man, it's not your property probably better off to leave, right? So yeah, I mean, there are certain crimes that I think could be on the book. So yeah, it's I guess to answer your question,
Okay.
maybe that one.
And I guess in anarchist utopia, there wouldn't be a police force, obviously. Right?
No,
Or would
that's no privately.
Okay.
Yeah,
Private police. Okay.
yeah, private
Okay,
police
gotcha.
force. And we've got quite a few private police forces around the country, and they
Mhm.
work out very well. It's one of those things where if people don't like the private police force that they're paying into, they defund it, and at some
Mhm.
point they hire maybe a new contractor, a new whatever it is, and they boil it down to things like we're talking about instead of jaywalking or driving
Gotcha.
with a tag that's a paper tag instead of a state approved tag or whatever. Like they kind of, okay, yeah, we know the states passed some of these laws, but that's not really in our contract, so we're not going to enforce these things.
Should people need driver's licenses?
Depends on what road you're on. If you're on a private road and you meet the criteria, which maybe a private driver's license, I think would be better, because what is this like? I don't know about the UK, but I'll tell you here in the States, like when somebody gets a driver's license and they don't know how to drive in the slow lane and they're out in the fast lane, like that's fail immediately. It's not a license doesn't make you a better driver. It just means that you paid the state and you've got some competency of like pressing the accelerator, staying in the lines, and pushing the brake. Like
I don't know what it's like in the US. In the UK, getting a driving license isn't that easy.
Oh, it's super easy here.
It's not that easy. You definitely can't buy one. You have to be decently competent to pass the driving test here. I don't know what it's like in the States, but and also here, like majority of cars are also manual, right? So you do actually you can't just kind of jump in a car and do some turns and they'll give you your license. Like most people don't pass the first time, I don't think.
Yeah, honestly, here, if you know what a road sign looks like and you can read the road sign, right? It's like you're good. You don't have to. I mean, there's no language requirement here anymore, I don't think. And at the same time, what passes for drivers, especially here in Metro Atlanta. Boy, it's rough, man. It's real rough. I would honestly, I would rather it be a private certification type of system. If there was a network of private roads where you had to understand, listen, trucks and vehicles moving slowly, you got to be in the right lane. They're also rated heavier lanes, so we're not, producing the same amount of, footprint for the trucks that we are for the light cars and light trucks out there in the fast lane. Just common sense sort of things that would save everybody a ton of money and time.
And if you violate, then what?
Well, I mean, there's obviously a penalty per the private contract that you entered into on a private road system.
What if you don't pay it?
Well, I imagine you don't get to use that road anymore.
How do they stop you?
Access control.
Tell me more.
So we have access control type roads all over the place out here.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so access control roads here, and they're actually even state roads. But basically, you'll have your little decal and pass. So every time you pass a place, they can enforce everything from your license plate to the speed that you traveled to the what type of maybe loads you might be hauling and things like that. Like this is all very much figured out by a lot of people who are in that space where they have access control points where it's very seamless to you. You pay a bill at the end of the month, basically.
Okay.
So every time you use an access control type road, you pay it. It's like a toll road or something like that, and it automatically comes out of a debit type account.
Okay, no, it's interesting, man. I've like some of these ideas I'm familiar with. Some of them are new to me. I'm just kind of playing different scenarios through in my head. I'm thinking of all the things that we do currently outsource to governments and don't really think about. I think that's also a big hurdle, right? Is that it's having to
terrible hurdle.
I'm already kind of like I am very far from a big government dude, but there are things that the government does, like I mentioned, immigration, national defense. I would go as far as, some libertarians may hate me for this, but, public roads, firefighters, police, all of these things I think have room for improvement. But I think, okay, those ones I'm like, I'm not going to put up a fight. Let me put it that way. I'm not going to be like, okay, we need to get rid of the police force, and we need to privatize the fire department, and we need to privatize all of these roads, etc. it's kind of like, oh boy, like that's
It's
gonna get real complicated real fast.
It's one of those things where I always try to tell people, hey, listen, your lack of imagination shouldn't, and I mean, I don't mean it in a mean way. It's like your lack of imagination for this particular subject is just because maybe that's not your space, right? It's like this isn't your passion. This isn't where your genius lies. But I'll tell you what, man, there's somebody who's got this stuff figured out, right? They like FedEx figured out mail. UPS figured out mail. Here in the United States, you know who hasn't figured out the mail? The government. Like that stuff is lost. It's all over the place. It's late as hell. It sucks. And so it's like, it's not that we can't do it. It's just one of those things where we have to have the idea that, hey, man, there is somebody who's going to crack that code. And why would we deprive them of being like a Bill Gates or, like if they can add to humanity, if they can take that passion that they have and turn it into genius, man, geniuses lift humanity. And it's like, let's let more people's passion run and let's see what type of genius they come up with. And that only comes around with freedom. That doesn't come around with, centralized control of things.
Here's a big question. And it's something you've already alluded to. So we're seeing in this time that we live in that we have companies that are arguably more powerful than governments.
I agree.
Already, okay?
Yeah.
So, I mean, not just Twitter, social media deplatformed the sitting president of the United States of America.
Yeah, they sure did.
Like that is a power flex right there.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Like I don't think people think about how deep that is. Like some people are just like, people who like Trump tend to be like, oh, that's, honest people who dislike him still tend to be like, that's bad. But, so many people are like, oh, well, just get rid of Trump. Like we don't like him, whatever. And I'm like, I don't think everyone is thinking about how deep that actually is, right? Like if they can do that to him. Yeah, there you go, right? So, and one role of the government, whether or not they always do it appropriately, is to check monopolies.
Antitrust type, yeah.
Yeah, so I do also wonder, in a world without the government, could you not just end up with, like I said, we're already seeing this in real life. Could you not just end up with imagine if Google, Amazon, Apple, Disney, and like Facebook, imagine if they like joined up together. Like we're already seeing Facebook eating up Instagram and WhatsApp and like imagine if they just joined together and just became just Globotech, and this essentially just becomes
the gym,
right?
Donde está la biblioteca?
Like this literally just becomes the new like ultimate government, right? Like not and worse, like even more information. Like they know everything about you. They're tracking your movements, and it's like they know what you're doing. They know you better than you do. I mean, that's already the case, but I do also wonder, okay, in this scenario, like if they tried to do that, as it stands, the government would stop them, right? Like they wouldn't let Facebook and Amazon merge together. Like that would be I don't think they'd allow that. I think that would be one step too far.
So yeah, let's unpack this because I have an answer for you, and I'm excited to tell you guys and your audience about this too. So I agree. Like technocracy and giant corps and everything else, like those guys are already in bed and helping control the government. And I agree that deplatforming a president or an ex-president, right? Like huge deal. That nobody was like, whatever.
He was president. I think it's important that he was president at the time.
Yes. Yeah, he was. And so
president.
Deplatform. What hasn't solved that to date is government, right? Like they haven't solved that. They don't want to solve it. Those guys, what they want to do is see how they can make money and have more power because of it, right? Now, if they go out and everybody who clamors for the internet to be, regulated, right? Like it's not going to be regulated the way you think it's going to be regulated. It's not going to be regulated the way you want it to be regulated. It's going to be regulated the way they want it regulated. And I'll tell you, between here and the Democrats and the Republicans, like I don't want something that's regulated by those guys. Now, there is an answer. right? Like people saw this coming back in 2009 with the last, economic collapse here in the States. And what they did was they went out and they protested Wall Street, right? Like it was one of those things where they're like, man, this can't happen again. So what do? They came up with blockchain, and blockchain technology is one of those technologies that doesn't just apply to cryptocurrencies. Blockchain technology is one of those, very, very ingenious, archetypes that gives people the ownership of decentralization of not only money but their social posts and things like that. So there's places popping up like Hive Online. I don't know if you guys have heard of Hive Online, but you got to have keys. It's a blockchain technology. They've got different types of platforms on there that are very much like Twitter, that are very much like YouTube and everything else. But the difference is you can't be deplatformed there. And the more you contribute to those, the more tokens or whatever that can add up into your account. So there is already an answer for this coming out of the private sector through people who are consenting in those type of ways. And I think that's, blockchain is I think probably going to do more for freeing the world than, guys like me or anybody in a government type of system. I think blockchain is actually going to be where we start to see the human species evolve into whatever, damn right, man. It's like, that's it. That's the future. They can't stop it. China tried to stop it. China got smacked. I mean, when China can't shut down Bitcoin with their, like, you're like, well, if China can't do it and the US knows what's going on and they're like, well, man, we're not going to try to slap Bitcoin, because if we try to slap them and we fail, then what? It's a black eye, right? It's like a black eye for our own power. And so they're not even going to have that fight. Blockchain is just eventually going to, I think, really take the wind out of a lot of the sails of people who want, power for very bad reasons.
No doubt, man. Well, we will see. Shane, man, we could talk for hours on end, but I want to be respectful of your time, and we'll definitely have you back on again in the future. But for people who are curious to learn more about you, what can they check out and where can they follow you online?
Yeah, all my links are at radicalpod.com, just like you spell radical, radicalpod.com. I'm Shane T. Hazel on Twitter. Would love for you guys to go out and follow there. And on YouTube, it's Shane Hazel GA. I am trying to get a better connection out here in the mountains, man. And so it's coming. Starlink in the private market is coming out here thanks to Tesla and Elon Musk. So hopefully by midsummer or mid-fall sometime, I'll have Starlink up and running and I'll have a better signal. But Zuby, I tell you, I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time, man, and I appreciate the platform. Anytime that you need somebody to fill in or anything, let me know, and would love to have you on my show here soon.
No doubt, brother. Thanks for coming on, man.
Peace.
I'm not scared. Put some respect on my name.